Whoa. 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 Abba. Whoa.
On March 2nd, 2026, an anonymous non-commissioned officer sent an email to Mikey Weinstein of the Military Religious Freedom Foundation. The officer was speaking on behalf of multiple members of their unit, including several Christians, a Jew, and a Muslim. This morning, they wrote, "Our commander opened up the combat readiness status briefing by urging us to not be afraid as to what is happening with our combat operations in Iran right now. He urged us to tell our troops that this was all part of God's divine plan, and he specifically referenced numerous citations out of the book of Revelation referring to Armageddon and the imminent return of Jesus Christ. He said that President Trump had been anointed by Jesus to light the signal fire in Iran to cause Armageddon and mark his return to Earth." Just 2 days earlier, in the early hours of February 28th, Israeli F-35s crossed into Iranian airspace as part of Operation Roaring Lion. At the same time, American B-2 stealth bombers swooped in as part of Operation Epic Fury. One American Tomahawk missile found its way to a school, killing 165 civilians, mostly little girls between the ages of 7 and 12. American citizens awoke Saturday morning to realize that their country's military was once again dropping bombs on the Middle East. He had a big grin on his face when he said all of this, which made his message seem even more crazy, the anonymous NCO continued. "Our commander would probably be described as a Christian First supporter. He has been this way for a very long time and makes it clear that he desires all of us under him to become just like him as a Christian. But what he did this morning was so toxic and over the line that it shocked many of us in attendance at the Ops Readiness briefing." By the following day, according to Weinstein, the MMRF had received well in excess of 200 complaints from well in excess of 50 military installations. "They are continuing to come in everywhere," he says. On March 6th, more than 24 Democratic members of Congress requested an internal investigation at the Department of Defense. They demanded to know just what the hell is going on with this Christian biblical prophecy stuff coming from the military's highest ranks. On March 12th, retired U.S. Army Colonel and MRFF Advisory Board member Lawrence Wilkerson weighed in on the controversy, referring to the indoctrination of a sizable portion of the U.S. military in the religion of Christianity, a very warlike, venomous, and all-encompassing version of that religion. One that, in an extremely illogical doctrinal development, joins ultra-Zionist Jews with affected Christians in painting this unprecedentedly brutal war with Iran as a scheduled event, and the scheduler is God. The beliefs that these commanders hold are not fringe. According to Pew Research, approximately 39% of American adults believe that humanity is currently living in the end times, as described by biblical prophecy. Many of these Christians do not believe the world is worth preserving, and it's all because of events that happened over 2,500 years ago. By around 593 BC, the Babylonian king Nebuchadnezzar had conquered Jerusalem, destroyed the Jewish temple, and forcibly deported thousands of Jews to Mesopotamia, or modern-day Iraq. Among these exiles was a priest named Ezekiel ben Buzi. Years into exile, Ezekiel recorded a series of visions he claimed to have received from God, and based on writings on really old parchments, we now have the Old Testament book of Ezekiel. Through these visions, Ezekiel assured the Jewish diaspora that the 12 tribes of Israel would eventually reunite under a king from the line of David. Chapters 38 and 39 describe a figure called Gog, who rules a land called Magog. According to Ezekiel's vision, Magog would lead a massive coalition of foreign nations against this restored Israel. This devastating war would not end until God himself intervened on behalf of the Jews. "I will strike your bow from your left hand and make your arrows drop from your right hand," God said to Ezekiel to tell Gog. "On the mountains of Israel you will fall, you and all your troops and the nations with you. I will give you as food to all kinds of carrion birds and to the wild animals. I will send fire on Magog and on those who live in safety in the coastlands, and they will know that I am the Lord. The defeat of Israel's foes will be so complete that it will take 7 months to bury the dead." In 1970, about 2,500 years after Ezekiel's day, a pastor named Hal Lindsey published a book called The Late Great Planet Earth. This became the best-selling nonfiction book of the entire decade, selling tens of millions of copies worldwide. Lindsey argues in it that these ancient prophets were actually describing the literal mechanics of a 20th century nuclear war. The Book of Revelation, for instance, describes stars falling from the sky. These are missiles re-entering the atmosphere. The sun turns black and the moon turns blood red. Nuclear fallout, or the dust clouds of thermonuclear explosions. And then there is Zechariah 14:12, which describes an army struck by a plague in which their flesh shall dissolve while they stand on their feet. Their eyes shall dissolve in their sockets. and their tongues shall dissolve in their mouths. A nuclear detonation, Lindsay says, as described through the eyes of a desert-dwelling prophet who saw but did not have the language necessary to accurately describe his prophetic vision. By this time, the Cuban Missile Crisis in October of 1962 was just 8 years earlier, and it had traumatized the entire world with the prospect of nuclear holocaust. One cannot blame evangelicals like Lindsay of seeing in Ezekiel's prophecy a map of modern-day geopolitics. But if you're one of these people who believes that nuclear escalation is fulfillment of God's judgment, then when your nation joins Israel in a holy war against Iran, you don't negotiate with God's plan, you don't apologize for it, you grin and you tell them, "Be not afraid, because I know how this ends, and the ending is good, so long as you're a Christian." How did these doomsday zealots infiltrate the highest ranks of our government and of the American military?
To that point on capabilities, Iran's an energy-rich country, could be, should be. Instead, like so many other places driven by a radical ideology, they've spent that money instead of investing in their people, and they invested in missiles, and they invested in launchers and UAVs.
It's the summer of 1979. Iran is in the middle of a revolution. The American-installed Shah has fled the country to safety in the United States, and Ayatollah Khomeini is returning from exile in Paris. At the U.S. Embassy in Tehran, Iranian students will soon take 52 American diplomats hostage. They'll release 13 hostages quickly, African Americans and women, viewing these classes in solidarity as people also oppressed by American imperialism. As the Cold War enters its most dangerous decade, many evangelicals indoctrinate their children with the belief that the world will end catastrophically, and it's all part of God's plan. In Lynchburg, Virginia, a Baptist minister named Jerry Falwell is reshaping American politics. He is the head of one of the largest congregations in the country, with a nationally broadcast radio and television ministry reaching millions of homes. And for his taste, the United States is progressing a little too fast. School prayers getting banned, abortion is legalized, the Equal Rights Amendment looms over the horizon, the gay rights movement is gaining traction. America is clearly in moral decay, and it is time for the church to do something about it. So in June of 1979, with the encouragement of a group of conservative political strategists, including Paul Weyrich and Richard Viguerie, Falwell found a movement called the Moral Majority. Their mission is to mobilize conservative Christian voters behind the Republican Party. Desegregation, you see, just isn't riling up the base as much as it used to, so the Republicans have to pivot especially hard toward the issue of abortion. Within a year, the Moral Majority claims several million members, with activities ranging from voter registration drives to political lobbying to mass fundraising through direct mail. This latter activity helps them build a national financial infrastructure practically overnight. In the autumn prior to the 1980 presidential election between Republican Ronald Reagan and incumbent Democrat Jimmy Carter, Falwell's group purchases $10 million in television and radio commercials to brand Carter as a traitor to the South and no longer a Christian. Carter is a man, a carpenter, who will go on to spend the twilight years of his life building homes for people who need them. The Moral Majority will deliver 2/3 of the white evangelical vote to the Republican. With Reagan's inauguration in January of 1981, the marriage between evangelical Christianity and the Republican Party is consummated. The Heritage Foundation is a conservative think tank founded in 1973 by Moral Majority co-founder Paul Weyrich. They are ready for this moment. They give Reagan a 3,000-page plan of action called Mandate for Leadership, packed with nearly 1,000 policy recommendations focused on economic deregulation, tax cuts, shrinking federal agencies, and an aggressive, confrontational posture toward the Soviet Union. It is the original Project 2025, and the Reagan administration embraces it. On October 18, 1983, Reagan calls Thomas Dine, executive director of the American Israel Public Affairs Committee, or AIPAC, a pro-Israel lobbying group and one of the most influential in the United States. "You know," the president says, "I turn back to your ancient prophets in the Old Testament and the signs foretelling Armageddon, and I find myself wondering if we are the generation that is going to see that come about." The Military Religious Freedom Foundation is founded in 2005 by Mikey Weinstein, a former Air Force officer. Weinstein, a Christian himself, and his sons had experienced firsthand what he described as systematic religious discrimination and coercion at the hands of fundamentalist Christian officers. This is not a handful of rogue commanders pushing their faiths onto grunts. It's an entire network of evangelicals who believe it is their sacred duty to Christianize the military from within. By 2005, the U.S. is 2 years into the Iraq War. President George W. Bush, himself an evangelical, sees the $3 trillion invasion of Iraq as a crusade by God's chosen nation. In 2006, the MRFF documents a promotional video filmed inside the Pentagon that features uniformed generals endorsing a Christian evangelical organization called Christian Embassy, an offshoot of the Campus Crusade for Christ. A Department of Defense investigation confirms that multiple violations of Pentagon policy had been committed. The violations are noted, people are probably chewed out, but literally nothing changes. These people continue to organize, to grow bolder, to rise through the ranks. In 2013, Lance Wallnau and Bill Johnson publish a book called Invading Babylon, the Seven Mountain Mandate. They identify 7 spheres of influence through which culture is shaped and controlled: religion, family, education, business, media, arts and entertainment, and government. They tell willful believers to see themselves as active agents of change who can establish strongholds of truth and justice. And nowhere is that strategy pursued more deliberately or more successfully than from within the United States Armed Forces. In 2021, a National Guardsman is removed from security duty at President Joe Biden's inauguration. Sergeant Derico Gaither had sent an image of one of the man's tattoos to General William Walker. "This information is quite disturbing, sir," he said of the Deus Vult tattoo, which he says is associated with supremacist groups, and therefore violates the Army's rule prohibiting tattoos with extremist words or images. Deus Vult means God wills it, and featured prominently in the manifesto of the Christchurch mosque shooter just 2 years earlier, on March 15th of 2019. 51 people were killed, mostly New Zealand Muslims. That guardsman with the Deus Vult tattoo is named Pete Hegseth, co-host of Fox and Friends Weekend and author of a 2020 book called American Crusade, in which he describes a holy war for the righteous cause of human freedom. The book's final 2 words are Deus Vult. Just 4 years later, President Donald Trump nominates this insider threat as the 29th Secretary of Defense. 3 Republicans vote against him. Every Democrat votes against him. Vice President J.D. Vance has to break the 50-50 tie. In September later that year, Hegseth stands in the Oval Office as Trump signs an executive order renaming the Department of Defense the Department of War. This is not just about renaming, Hegseth says. It's about restoring. Hegseth begins hosting monthly Christian prayer services at the Pentagon, communicated via email not only to military personnel but to defense contractors. He invites Doug Wilson to lead a worship service, a pastor who opposes women's right to vote and advocates for a Christian theocracy. Hegseth also holds a weekly Bible study whose leader teaches that Israel must be supported to fulfill prophecy and hasten the second coming. Historically, says MRFF founder Mikey Weinstein, we've been able to get the Pentagon to push back on Christian incursions into the military. The Trump administration, though, is openly disdainful of military norms and law. MAGA's approved solution, Weinstein says, is to be straight, white, Christian, and male. And that's bad enough when you find Christian nationalism in elementary schools, middle schools, high schools, colleges, right? Legislatures, the cops, the firefighters, the sewage workers. But when you find it where all the nuclear weapons are, and the laser-guided weapons and the drones, it is an absolute threat, an immediate threat to the national security of our country and the world. And so, on the morning of February 28, 2026, as American bombers cross into Iranian airspace to support Israel's holy war, commanders are telling their soldiers not to be afraid. God is on our side, they say. Deus Vult. Leaders of other nations, meanwhile, have their own ideas about God's will. In 1984, Benjamin Netanyahu, at just 34 years old, is the deputy chief of mission at the Israeli embassy in Washington. He'll soon become Israel's ambassador to the United Nations. He's ambitious, polished, fluent in English, and largely unknown outside diplomatic circles. He travels to the Crown Heights neighborhood of Brooklyn, New York, to meet a man named Menachem Mendel Schneerson. Rabbi Schneerson, known simply as the Rebbe, is the 7th leader of the Chabad Lubavitch movement, a branch of Hasidic Judaism that was nearly made extinct by the Holocaust. By the 1980s, it had followers across the world. The Rebbe is considered one of the most influential Jewish figures of the entire century, with the ears of world leaders and Israeli prime ministers. As a young Benjamin Netanyahu sits across from the Rebbe, he says something Bibi would never forget. The arrival of the Moshiach, the Jewish Messiah, is imminent. Just 1 year earlier, Reagan had called the director of AIPAC, worried that his generation would trigger the biblical end of days. God has a very special role for Netanyahu in all of this, the Rebbe says. You are going to the UN, an assembly hall that has falsehood and utter darkness. In a hall of perfect darkness, if you light one small candle, its light will be seen from afar. Your mission is to light a candle for truth and the Jewish people. Netanyahu, the Rebbe will later say, will be Israel's last prime minister, who will pass the scepter to the Messiah. Netanyahu has been telling this story publicly, repeatedly, and with great emotion for 40 years now. He's been trying to trigger a war with Iran ever since.
מה שרואה עוד, וגם משהו שעדיין משיח ליבו, אז אולי תעשה מה שהוא עם מה ידיעתו. ועושים. הכנראה שהיא מספיק, כאילו שהיום כבר כמה שעות בגיל עדיין ליבו, אבל יש עוד כמה שעות, אבל יש להשתדל גם היום.
In January of 1992, as a member of the Israeli parliament, Netanyahu tells the Knesset that Iran is just 3 to 5 years away from having a nuclear weapon. 3 years later, he reaffirms that assessment in his book, Fighting Terrorism. On July 10, 1996, he addresses a joint session of U.S. Congress calling on Europe and Asia to join efforts to isolate Iran and Iraq and prevent them from developing nuclear capabilities that would bring catastrophe. President Bill Clinton does not take the bait, and would later say of Netanyahu, "Who the f*** does this guy think he is? Who's the f***ing superpower here?" In 2002, Netanyahu testifies before the U.S. House of Representatives, urging military action against Iraq while explicitly linking Baghdad's weapons programs to Tehran's. His testimony helps build the case for the Iraq war looming over the horizon, but President George W. Bush does not take the bait on Iran. In 2012, Netanyahu stands before the UN General Assembly and holds up a diagram of a cartoon bomb with a lit fuse, drawing a red line at the point he says Iran will cross within months. President Barack Obama does not take the bait. In September of 2024, Netanyahu stands before the United Nations General Assembly and declares that the era of the Messiah will come. For over 30 years, Netanyahu has been issuing the same warnings about Iran. He's just waiting for the right conditions, for the right American president to be stupid enough to take the bait. 9 months later, on June 22, 2025, President Donald Trump takes the bait, joining Israel's surprise offensive by attacking 3 Iranian nuclear facilities under Operation Midnight Hammer. Various Middle Eastern states press Trump to use his influence on Israel to end the conflict and restart negotiations. The plan works. Without U.S. support, Netanyahu's plans are foiled, and the Messiah does not appear. In Jewish Messianic theology, the Messiah is a warrior king, descended from the line of King David, a man of flesh and blood who will gather the Jewish people, defeat Israel's enemies, and rebuild the temple in Jerusalem, as prophesied by Ezekiel 2,600 years ago. This would be the 3rd temple, which would require the removal or relocation of the Dome of the Rock and Al-Aqsa Mosque from the Temple Mount. Any attempt to build the 3rd temple now would trigger a war with the entire Islamic world, which means this temple cannot be built until this Davidian king arrives and takes control of Israel from Netanyahu. Within his far-right Likud coalition are ministers who have made preparation for this temple a serious political priority. Organizations like the Temple Institute in Jerusalem have already designed the sacred vessels, the priestly garments, the architectural blueprints. Kohanim, or men of the priestly lineage of Aaron, are being identified and trained as we speak. In 2022, 5 red heifers were flown from Texas to Israel. According to the Book of Numbers, you need the ashes of an unblemished red heifer for the ritual purification necessary before temple worship can resume. As of this writing, those heifers are still in Israel, waiting for their moment when the smell of their burnt flesh will please the Lord. But time is running out. Netanyahu is 76 years old, just 3 years younger than America's own sundowning far-right head of state. It would be terribly inconvenient and a huge setback to the apocalyptic Zionist movement if Netanyahu were to perish before the Messiah became known. And there's another thing. The genocidal state of Israel has never officially confirmed that it possesses nuclear weapons, but it almost certainly possesses somewhere between 80 and 400 nuclear warheads, making it the only nuclear power in the Middle East. Israel has a doctrine for how these warheads might be used in an emergency. It's called the Samson option. Samson was an Israelite warrior who was captured by the Philistines sometime between 1200 and 1000 BC. They gouged out his eyes and made him a slave. One day, during a festival, the Philistines brought him into their temple of Dagon to mock him. Standing between the 2 great pillars that held up the temple's roof, Samson prayed to God for one final burst of strength. He grabbed the pillars, pushed with all his might, and brought the entire temple down on himself, on his captors, and on 3,000 spectators. "Let me die with the Philistines," he said, according to chapter 16, verse 30 of the book of Judges. The Samson option is the nuclear doctrine that if Israel faces existential destruction, if the state itself is on the verge of annihilation, it will use those 80 to 400 nuclear warheads secretly in its possession to take Israel's enemies down with it. Mutually assured destruction, or MAD, is a concept with which many who grew up during the Cold War are intimately familiar. It is, in the most literal sense possible, a world-ending doomsday weapon named after a man who chose to die, taking everyone else with him. The man who controls that doomsday weapon today has a warrant for his arrest from the International Criminal Court for war crimes and crimes against humanity. He also may believe with all his heart that he was chosen by God to cement his people's place as God's chosen, once and for all, and he is running out of time.
And I want to close these opening remarks with one other fake news, and that is that Israel somehow dragged the U.S. into a conflict with Iran. Does anyone really think that someone can tell President Trump what to do? Come on.
Islam is the world's second largest religion, with approximately 2 billion adherents. Like Judaism and Christianity before it, Islam has developed its own rich tradition of apocalyptic belief, its own sequence of signs and figures and final battles. At the center of their tradition is a figure called the Mahdi, or the Guided One. Sunni is the larger of the two major branches of Islam and represents roughly 85% of the world's Muslims. To them, the Mahdi is understood as a future leader, a descendant of the Prophet Muhammad who will appear at a time of great chaos and injustice to unite the Muslim world and establish a reign of justice on earth. Shia Muslims, by contrast, specifically the Twelver Shia, who form the theological backbone of the Iranian state, believe that the Mahdi is a man named Muhammad al-Mahdi, born in the year 869 AD, the 12th in the line of holy imams descended from the Prophet himself. According to this belief, God took this man into a state of occultation, of divine hiding, where he has remained waiting for over 1,000 years now. He will emerge at the appointed time in Mecca, when the world has reached a sufficient state of chaos and injustice. He will then lead the final righteous uprising against a world in which the powerful do as they wish, and the weak suffer what they must. When the Mahdi's army reaches the Umayyad Mosque in Damascus, Jesus, the very same Jesus Hegseth and his commanders are trying to summon, will descend from the heavens, borne on the wings of angels and carrying a great spear. In Islamic eschatology, the Mahdi will humbly offer Jesus the right to lead the congregation in prayer. Jesus will refuse and defer to the Guided One. This is meant to be taken as a symbolic acknowledgement of the superiority of Islam as the final and complete revelation of God's will. Iran's state-run Islamic Republic news agency, in the days following the February 28 strikes, quotes Hezbollah Secretary General Sheikh Naim Qassem declaring that the Islamic Republic is, in his own words, the government of Imam Mahdi, and that its resistance against the United States is the path to hastening his reappearance. 3 apocalyptic prophecies, 3 sides engaged in a holy war in which they believe God is with them. This war will not have a clean resolution. And not everyone in this war is in it for the end of days. Saudi Arabia would love to supplant Iran as the dominant power in the Middle East. Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman conducted multiple phone calls with Trump in the weeks before the February 28th strikes, urging him to get involved. Dubai wants everyone to return to the negotiating table. They don't really have the resources, let alone the water, to survive the prolonged economic instability this war is causing. Private defense companies with lucrative Pentagon contracts don't care whether their merchandise strikes a barracks or a schoolhouse. They're swimming in billions of taxpayer dollars one way or the other. Donald Trump himself is likely not guided by end-times theology either. His relationship with Christianity has always been at best transactional. Evangelicals and Christian nationalists are merely loyal voting blocs of the Republican Party, just as they've been since the days of Reagan and the moral majority.
It just seemed like she was going to really look to impeach Bush and get him out of office, which personally I think would have been a wonderful thing.
Impeaching him?
Absolutely, for the war. For the war.
Because of the conduct of the
war. Well, he
war.
lied. He got us into the war with lies. And, I mean, look at the trouble Bill Clinton got into with something that was totally unimportant. And they tried to impeach him, which was nonsense. And yet Bush got us into this horrible war with lies, by lying, by saying they had weapons of mass destruction, by saying all sorts of things that turned out not to be true.
The level of retribution, reprisal, and revenge is disgusting, says MRFF founder Mikey Weinstein. What has happened here with this attempt to merge our actions preemptively in Iran with the Christian end times is a massive destruction of the good order, morale, discipline, unit cohesion, health, and safety of the troops and mission accomplishment that we need to have a lethal military. It's drawing it at light speed. If roughly 40% of Americans believe that the end is nigh, that means the remaining 60% of Americans don't buy into this doomsday stuff. And when Reuters and Ipsos polled Americans on the strikes against Iran, only 25% were in support, which is even lower than the percentage of Americans who still identify as MAGA. 3 out of 4 Americans do not want this war. On March 4th, 2026, at a Senate War Powers Resolution vote, firefighter and Marine veteran Brian McGinnis, in his full military uniform, shouts out,
"America does not want to send its sons and daughters to war for Israel. Your inability to name that shows your exemptness as leaders. Out. This is wrong. Stop. And nobody wants to fight for Israel." A reminder to all our Commandant, please stand up as a Marine and stand up for America. Out. No one wants to fight for Israel.
Sir, thank you for your service.
Senator broke his hand. The senator broke his hand.
Please help him.
Senator,
He's a Marine. Somebody come help him.
control your Senate committee.
Look at you guys. You're robots.
A U.S. senator.
You won't even look back. Look at you guys. You're like robots. Oh my God, what is happening?
Broke the hand of a Marine. You're a coward.
And you're not even looking back, any of you.
McGinnis is not the only American who believes that this war is primarily for Israel's benefit. American foreign and military policy must be determined by the American people, says Senator Bernie Sanders of Vermont, not the right-wing extremist Netanyahu government. Israelis, meanwhile, have been in the streets protesting against Netanyahu's corruption for years, hundreds of thousands of them, week after week, in one of the largest sustained protest movements in the country's history. They're protesting judicial overreach, democratic backsliding, corruption cases, and the rise of the far right. Just as Americans have been protesting these very same things, the working class majority in Israel is being steamrolled, just as it is in the United States. And as far as Iran is concerned, only 26% of Iranians believe in the Mahdi prophecy. According to a major survey conducted by Gaman, a respected Dutch-based polling institute that has spent years finding ways to survey Iranians anonymously, only 32% of Iranians even identify as Shia Muslim anymore. Half the country has effectively left Islam, with a significant portion describing themselves as atheist or agnostic. They just want to live their lives and protect their families, just like you and I. James Tallarico, who recently won the Democratic primary for the Senate seat in Texas, has called Christian nationalism the worship of power, social power, economic power, political power, in the name of Christ. They've turned Jesus into a gun-toting, gay-bashing, science-denying, money-loving, fear-mongering fascist, he said, and it's incumbent on all Christians to confront it and denounce it. This is not a war between Christians, Jews, and Muslims. This is a war between a very small number of apocalyptic true believers and a much larger number of cynical opportunists who have seized the machinery of their respective right-wing governments. We are, each and every one of us, working-class Americans, working-class Israelis, and working-class Iranians, hostages to these people, and it is up to us to break free and join with our brothers and sisters against our true oppressors. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe. I do respond to comments, so if you want to engage me in discussion, please do. And if you're doing well this month, please consider supporting the growth of my channel by buying me a coffee. And as always, stay safe out there and be good.
I just want to thank President Donald Trump for liberating the people of Iran. Thank you. So kind of you. So generous of you. I mean, really. How selfless you are to spend $200+ billion on Israel and the Jewish supremacists. Thank you so much for liberating Iran. My goodness, look what you've done to the place. It's so much better already. How wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, President.